everyone and welcome to my January wrap-up. Okay, so in the month of January I managed to read quite a few books, and here are the stats because I haven't actually figured them out yet, but this is my stats. I've done quite well and managed to also gain 18 points for TBR Assemble, which means I decimated Thanos. So brilliant start to TBR Assemble to say the least, and just a brilliant start to January. Unfortunately there were a couple of bad books in here, so I'm going to start with those and then go all the way through to the good stuff. So the first book I read was The Ultimates, and I want to bleach it out of my brain. It was awful, and I mean truly awful, and it made me want to have a shower immediately afterwards. And it's actually put me off comics for the rest of the month. I am literally filming this on the 25th, and I just know that I need fan fiction to just soothe my soul and my brain, because it was so disgusting and abhorrent that I know I can't touch a comic for the rest of the week, maybe until not next Friday, the Friday afterwards. And that's how bad this was. So I'm just going to give you the trigger warning so you can just get an idea of just how bad it was, because I don't want to talk about anything else but the trigger warnings, because it's 90% of the book. So the first trigger warning is more of a content warning, but it was the disgusting quote saying that they've been smashed more times than RDJ, aka Robert Downey Jr. This was written in 2004, so way before Iron Man came out and before Robert Downey Jr. became Iron Man, and when he was either in prison for drug abuse or was just coming out of his addiction or still battling his addiction. I personally haven't looked it up, but it's around that time when he was seriously struggling. So there's a joke in there about that, which is awful, and I should have known from that moment that this book was just going to go downhill, but I carried on because I really wanted to get to Who Killed Scarlet Witch, which I will get to in a minute. But continuing on, there were sexist comments the whole way through, fatphobic comments the whole way through. The amount of times the word fatties was used was unbelievable. Women could have been replaced with sexy lamps and no one would have noticed, because they did nothing for the storyline. They were basically there for Tony to either flirt with or sleep with, and that was their purpose. You also had the use of the R word at one point as well. The Hulk basically hunts down his ex-fiancée Betty Ross to sexually assault her because she has gone off with Freddie Prinze Jr. because that was a thing, and he's literally, it's made absolutely clear that he's basically going to go and sexually assault her because he is the Hulk and he's hulking out, and he's acting in defense of Banner or something, and there's an entire scene of this. An entire issue of this book is just that. You've also got the fact that Janet is also, to try and calm him down, so Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, to try and distract him for a second, shows him her boobs. Literally, she just does this to distract him, because that's not sexist at all, or like anyone would actually do that. Speaking of Janet, Hank Pym, her husband, has been abusing his wife emotionally and physically for their entire relationship. Betty Ross has done nothing, despite the fact that she's known about this. She has done literally nothing. She literally has done nothing. She literally watched him put her head through a wall and did nothing. And it's allowed to continue. He literally just assaults her by doing a lot of violent things. She shrinks down, and every single time she shrinks down she ends up naked, because somehow he can make himself into Giant Man and create clothes for himself, but he can't make shrinking clothes because that makes sense. So she's naked and he sets the ants on her because he can control ants, because he is the Ant-Man, and she ends up in hospital, and the only consequence he gets is Cap beating him up. And apart from that, Fury's like, no, we need him, he can stay on the team. But Bruce, who killed 300 people, which is admittedly worse because he killed 300 people on his rampage, gets locked up. Why can't Hank be locked up? Because he is literally beaten the living daylights out of his wife and emotionally abused her and everything else, and he gets to carry on, and the only thing he gets is a beating from Captain America. I have no words, and it continues. This literally continues. There is also the quote of the sexy Max Factor girl with the learning difficulties is an actual quote from this. No. Just no. There's homophobic comments. There's the anti-Semitic idea that lizard people are controlling the world. Again, that would have possibly passed me by, admittedly, a couple of years ago before I found out about anti-Semitic tropes and all the rest of it, but I'm including it so other people know. And still wrong, even though it is an now common trope, I'm counting it as a very, very bad trope because it's an anti-Semitic trope that goes back to the Middle Ages. And it's just wrong, quite frankly. It's just wrong. They literally use the word lizard people and everything else, and you're just like, really? Really? Maybe the author didn't know that it was anti-Semitic, but considering the content of the rest of this book, I'm going to say probably did. But there's also like the homophobic comments, as in at one point they set the Hulk on aliens, the lizard people, by saying that the lizard people wanted to sleep with him, and he goes, Hulk is not a sissy, Hulk likes women. So homophobic comments as well. And also the lizard people are working with the Nazis. They're literally working with the Nazis. They have been around since the Nazis. They've been working with Hitler and the Red Skull. The lizard people of the anti-Semitic trope have also been working with the Nazis. And I just couldn't take that anymore. It was a 1-star book. It was awful. The only reason why I'm mentioning it is so other people don't read it. I did not continue on to the second Ultimates comic by Mark Miller either. And I did not continue on to Who Killed Scarlet Witch either. Because even though that was written by a different person, turns out that has sibling incest between Wanda and Pietro. And I just went, I ain't reading this. I'm just not reading this. It was disgusting. It made me feel physically ill to read it. It actually ruined my day reading it because it was so horrible, and I haven't picked up a comic since. I always read comics. I am constantly reading comics. That's how bad this is. I physically can't pick one up at the moment until I have had a very, very, very good run of very good books that make me feel better. Luckily, Legendborn and Across the Green Grass Field I did that, but I just need a couple more days away from comics because I felt physically ill reading that. I am looking at all of my favourite characters a completely different way, despite the fact that it's just one comic, and all the other ones that I have read, they have been written beautifully. It's just awful, quite frankly, and I'm going to stop talking about it because it was just awful. Only marginally better was Avengers Scarlet Witch, because this is one of the most sexist comics I've ever read until that one. This was a 2-star read because this is a collection of short stories, and the artwork's just as it usually is in the 80s, but it's also filled with the 80s level of sexism, and the stories don't make sense. Literally, the stories didn't make any sort of sense in this, and it includes Scarlet Witch in this costume, which is basically a swimsuit and a cloak, wandering around at one point in the middle of winter in a swimsuit, and every time she ends up being battled, she's essentially being shown in arse shots quite a lot. There's one story where you see, which an entire page is dedicated to Spider-Woman in the shower. You don't see anything, but it's very clear what they're trying to get at. You've also got the fact that one of Scarlet Witch's friends was attacked, and she ends up at Wanda's house, and Wanda's like, oh, my husband will be home soon, but I'm sure he won't mind you staying for a couple of minutes, and he's like, who cares what your husband thinks? You know, very, very 80s, or like very early 60s to 80s. I think this was done in the 80s. 1972 to 1988. So, around that sort of era of that kind of thing, but even then I think it's slightly outdated in terms of what your husband wants compared to what you want. You've also got the moment where she's quite fatphobic towards herself because she's put on weight after having the children, and she's going, oh, I don't like this anymore, I should really lose weight, but my husband likes me so much in this costume. Again, who cares what your husband thinks? It's your body, do what you want with it, and if your husband don't like it, kick him out. Essentially, just kick him out. And it was, the whole way through this was just nonsensical stories, including the one where Wanda trusts someone and goes back to their house after meeting him for 5 minutes and naturally ends up being drugged, and her soul ends up being sent back in time to a previous ancestor who was a pirate. And then the pirate is drawn very, very sexily in terms of her boobs practically being out of her top. And then right at the end, you've also got the story where Pietro is also on the run with Wanda, and for some reason they're fully grown adults and she's getting changed in front of him, just so the innkeeper who's in there staying at sees her naked and then tries to assault her. I have no words, I have no words. So I'm going to stop now and just say it was a 2-star read and it was a massive disappointment and it's getting unhauled. I never unhaul comics. I'm unhauling 2. And I've never done that for Marvel comics in my life, but considering they were so awful, they're going. And now on to the good stuff. So the first I'm going to mention is Across the Green Grass Fields by Shauna Maguire. This was a 5-star read, and I loved it. I love the story. I really love the story. I love all of the Wayward Children stuff, but this was genuinely amazing to read because Shauna Maguire did it again and looked inside of my brain and took a facet of my childhood or part of me and made it into a character. The entirety of Regan's childhood in this world, very much like mine in terms of being the outsider, not fitting in, being different from everybody else, not like other girls type of situation, but just feeling like you're different and feeling like you're an outsider and like you're not fitting in and just having to cling to the one friend that is nice to you despite the fact that they are toxic. Totally get it. Been there entirely. I was not horse mad or anything like that, but I very much was like Regan. My only criticism with this book is that I kind of wish that the ending had been given a little bit more to it, because there is a plot twist at the end and I would like a bit more of an explanation to that, quite frankly, and I would have liked to have seen her end up at the school, but that's probably coming in a later book, so I can't really complain that much. But in saying that, I would have liked that plot twist explored a little bit more at the end, but other than that, it was absolutely brilliant. And I said I gave it 5 stars, I actually gave it 4, but either way, fantastic addition to the Wayward Children series, absolutely brilliant. I also read Legendborn, and I literally have just finished this like an hour ago at time of filming, and oh my god, is it good. Oh my god. I'm obsessed. I'm now obsessed with this book. Tracy Deonn is an absolute genius. This is literally a King Arthur retelling, but in the way of like shadow hunters, in the sense that they are actually fighting demons, and the descendants of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table are fighting demons. And this was incredible. I loved the world building of it. I loved all of the exploration of the different types of magic and everything else. It was absolutely brilliant. I only have 2 small things, one to do with the publisher, one just in terms of one of the characters. One of the characters is a complete arsehole. I won't say who it is in case you want to read this one, but then he's an arsehole to one of the main characters, and then they just sort of end up having this type of thing that may turn into a love triangle. I don't know yet, and I'm not really here for that because he treated her abysmally at the beginning of the book. But I can see them working together. I get why they work together and all the rest of it, but I would have liked that to maybe not become a love triangle. But that's just a thing that I will wait for in future books. I'm not really going to complain too much because obviously the future books may go down a different route. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there now. My other thing is that I kind of wish that in this book, at the beginning or at the end, there had been sort of like a family tree line to sort of explain like who the scions are, who the pages are, and all of that kind of thing, just to explain the hierarchy of the group, because I spent a lot of time going, wait, who's above each other in the hierarchy? The hierarchy did really confuse me in this. So if that had just had a small little thing somewhere of like where a page is, where a scion is, and all the rest of it, that would have been really useful. Admittedly, at the end there is a small bit about the bloodlines, what their sigil is, what their rank is, the colour they take over, the inheritance, as in what powers they get, and then also the weapons they prefer, which was very useful. But I would have liked just a little bit of like, just a small sort of diagram to go, right, this person's at the top, this person's next down, next down, next down, next down, next down, next down. That just would have been that tiny little bit useful, because I was a bit lost, I'm not going to lie. Also, I couldn't remember who half the characters were. Not the writer's fault whatsoever, tiny me fault, but I was watching Bridgerton at the same time, and obviously there are hundreds of Bridgertons and all those other characters, and keeping those characters in my head and this set of characters was just slightly too much. I have now learnt which one's which is really nice, but otherwise, other than that, I really love this book. I love the world building of it, I love the plot twist of it. That end plot twist just got to me quite a lot. I nearly cried several times in this book. I loved the casual diversity as well. There's several bisexual characters in here. There is one pairing which is a female-female relationship. Another character is mentioned to be in a relationship with another man. You've got bisexuality or maybe pansexuality. It's never really defined, but at the very least these characters like more than one gender, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that one. But before I go, I will say that this one, A, is a 4-star read, but it also has trigger warnings for death, lots of death, death of a parent, PTSD, like severe PTSD, general sort of mind control type aspects, and very controlling societies and secret societies and that kind of thing. So if you are triggered by any of these things, please do look up a full set of content warnings, because there are quite a few in this one. But other than that, it is fantastic, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out. I then also read the Scarlet Witch series by James Robinson, and this was a rather good series. It was not my favourite, I've got to admit. The first one really didn't grab me, and it just sort of built upon it afterwards. But I did really enjoy it. I cannot speak to the representation of the Roma people or anything, which is the people Scarlet Witch is descended from. I can't really talk about that because I am not an Own Voices review in that front. You'll have to look up Own Voices reviewers for that one yourself, and I'm going to have to do that as well personally. But I did still really enjoy the series, because this really explored Wanda just as a character and her lineage and her stories of her mother, her brother, like everything to do with that is explored in this series, and just where she gets her witch powers from, and just why she is the Scarlet Witch. And I've got to admit, it was a very interesting series. I really quite enjoyed the artwork in some of them. A couple of the stories artwork wasn't my favourite, because it seemed to be jumping between several different artists, but other than that, I did really enjoy it, and I gave it an average of 3 to 4 stars depending on the comic. And then finally, I've actually read Vision by Tom King, and this was by far my favourite comic of the month. To be honest, I should have read it like after I read Ultimates, to be honest, because that would have cheered me right up. But Vision was an incredible series. It was incredible. It was dark, it was twisted, it was very literary in its own way, in the sense that you've got this very like literary way of writing without it being too heavy for a comic book, but you also have this deep sense of foreboding the whole way through it, and watching everything just fall to pieces as Vision's trying to build this whole life for him and his other like his synthezoid family is so difficult, and watching them just fall to pieces and watch it completely fall to pieces was just unbelievably sad, but also unbelievably mind-blowing. It was an incredible book. I absolutely love it. If you're a fan of WandaVision or just Vision in general, I highly recommend reading it, because I was blown away reading this comic. It was truly incredible. But again, there are trigger warnings in this one for murder, death of a dog, experimentation, death of a child, 2 deaths of children actually. There's 2 deaths of 2 teenagers thinking about it. Death of a dog, I just said that. Murder, general prejudice, stuff like this. Again, look up the full trigger warnings. I'm sure there are a hell of a lot I've forgotten, but please do be careful reading this one. But if you are not triggered by that stuff, or you think you can handle it, I would highly recommend it. If you've been loving WandaVision, you can really see like exactly where some of the inspiration for the TV show has come from this book, and the sense of foreboding is the exact same thing. It is truly an incredible comic. Truly, I absolutely adored it. It was absolutely brilliant. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And that's absolutely everything I read for the second half of January. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give me a thumbs up. Comment down below with what you read in January. I'd love to know. I'll also leave a link down below to all my social media if you want to check it out, including to the comic book sanctum, which is filled with general WandaVision stuff, including a whole post all about all of the Easter eggs that I've seen so far in WandaVision that are to do with the comics. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link to it down below. And if you want to see any more of my videos, please click subscribe here, and over here will be the link to my previous video. But until next time everyone, bye!